Hi, everyone. August Biniaz here with CPI Academy. I'm joined by 𝗖𝗽 Benesocky. Welcome, Ava.
Thank you, August.
We host CPI Academy YouTube show dedicated to adding value to our viewers' investment journey. We bring on experts to discuss all topics related to real estate investing. So we hope you enjoy the video today.
That's right. Thank you, August. And hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are joined by the famous Anthony
Vicino.
Vicino.
Yeah.
You know,
It's a tricky one.
I stuttered.
August stepped up and he just took a swing at it. I love it.
it sounds like an Italian restaurant you go to, and then you're with a date, and you're trying to look cool that you know the name. So I was like panicking and trying to get the name right. So
yeah, you can say it the Italian way, which is Vicino.
Okay.
But then I'm Tony Vicino, and you got to do that with your hand, like that's a thing. So
okay, let me try this again. Today we are joined by Anthony Vicino.
There you go.
Welcome, Anthony.
Welcome, Anthony.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's good to be here.
Of course. Awesome. So, Anthony, let's just start off and tell our viewers a little bit about yourself. That'd be great.
Yeah. So I'm a multifamily investor. I do a lot of different things. Whenever I get that question of like, who are you? I don't necessarily know where to start, but I think for the purposes of this show, which is Canadian passive investors, what I do is something that took me a long time to figure out. And my journey was one of a kind of like many different entrepreneurial ventures at different points in my life because I have really severe ADHD. And so coming out of college, it was very clear that I was never going to cut it in a corporate environment. I was a really bad employee. I got fired a lot. I had really hard time in school. Like I just couldn't focus and couldn't apply myself when it came to working for other people. So I went off and I started rock climbing professionally. And then I started writing books, science fiction and fantasy, and then started building businesses, which eventually led me to real estate. And the intersection with real estate was I had been building these businesses that were reasonably complex. So one was a manufacturing company where we dealt with polyurethane widgets. And polyurethane is just really, really tricky to work with. And so I was looking to try and build my next thing that was going to be relatively simple, something understandable that didn't require, a degree in chemistry to figure out. And that thing was real estate. And the way that I liken it for people is that it's like Legos. They only go together in so many different ways. But once you understand how the Lego bricks go together, you can build anything with it. And that's really what real estate was for me, is this really interesting vehicle where you can build it to the sky. You can build it in whatever way you want. And so I did that for a number of years. And then at a certain point, I had a mentor who challenged me with the question of, what are you going to do to impact the lives of those around you? It wasn't just enough to build businesses because it was fun and engaging. It was, okay, what's the impact that this is having on the community, the people, the family around me? And I looked at my life and I said, what are the two areas that I felt the most stressed about? And one was money. So when I was younger, like coming out of school, I had a lot of student debt. I was very bad with money. I could blame ADHD, but I think it was just, I was really bad with money. And so I was very in debt. And for a long time in my early 20s, that was a very stressful thing. And then as I got older, I started to understand how money worked a little bit better, but I still have 6 brothers and sisters who are kind of going through the similar journey that I did. And they don't understand necessarily what they were doing, and they didn't know what they were investing in. And so they were putting their money into their 401ks and they were investing for retirement because that's kind of what you're told to do. But they didn't really know if that was the right lane for them or not. And so I had been doing multifamily investing for a while, and I realized, okay, I can actually help people deal with this thing that's so stressful, which is money and investing. And we can do that in an environment by making it simple, by making it understandable, and showing people that this is a vehicle that they could get into, and it's not super difficult to do so. And so that's what we did. We opened up our doors of Invictus Capital about a year and a half ago, and we started inviting passive investors to come into these projects with us. Before, we were just using our own money, but then we said, okay, let's open these doors and use it as a vehicle to make a maximum impact on our friends, our family, and now, like, complete strangers. Honestly, like, now we're to the point where people are just, coming to us that we've never met before and having the opportunity to work with them. And that's just been like the coolest thing. So that's me, the really long-winded answer of who I am and how I got here.
Incredible story.
Incredible.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
but touching on that concept of ADD, I mean, focus seems to be the key for success in business. But at the same time, uh, this idea of ADD, there are billionaires such as Richard Branson who have been diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, and now how does that work? How can focus be at the fundamental of success in business, but how can someone with ADD succeed in business? And the reason for that is certain businesses that pique the interest of people with ADD allows them to hyper focus,
Mhm.
especially a business such as this concept of multifamily syndication, where there's so many moving parts, there's so many plates that need to be juggled, or whatever you call when people
Yeah.
float plates, but there's so many moving parts to it. And that's what excited, and that was something that excited me. I felt being involved in real estate in one form or other in the last 15 years as a licensed real estate agent, doing small fix and flips, starting my own general contracting company, doing even larger developments. This concept of syndication, where it's not only yourself and your company, but you also allowing others to join the party, allowing
Yeah, that's
others
beautiful.
to invest passively and being accountable and earning a living relative to your performance. If you do well, you get a bigger portion of what your investors are making. So that was one of the reasons I fell in love with it, and ever since I've been hyper focused on multifamily. I would say it's probably the number one business or idea ever in my life that I've been so
Mhm.
more focused than anything else on. I've done sports, I've done boxing for many years, and I've been involved in construction and real estate. But this concept of in particular, apartment syndication or multifamily syndication is something that I've fell in love. So I really enjoyed hearing your story and
Yeah,
your
that's beautiful.
your progress and how it ended up making somebody who might have challenges with focus being so focused on this aspect and this one business idea. So I really appreciate hearing that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that.
You know what's so interesting about the ADHD and this idea of hyper focus? You're using that term, and I think for a lot of listeners, maybe they don't understand, but it's actually a technical term when it comes to people with ADHD. So the thing with us is that it's not that we can't focus; it's that we can't always control where we're focused. And so if we're not interested in a thing, if we're not curious about it, if we're not engaged with it, it's game over. We can't focus on it. But if it's something that sparks our soul with some kind of interest, then we go into what's known as a hyper focused state. And this is unique to people with ADHD. It's a lot like the flow state that what's his name, Csikszentmihalyi, talks about in his book Flow. And it's this heightened state where time kind of slows down, you lose sense of time altogether, and the world just disappears. And for me, was really interesting, to go back to my very early days as a kid. I was put on Ritalin from when I was 6 until I was 16. And that drug had a very unique effect on me in that it forced me into a hyper-focused state, but it also sapped me of all my physical energy. So I was kind of like trapped constantly inside my brain. I didn't have this power over my body anymore. And I was just focused on whatever was in front of me. And so when I finally got off that drug, I was like, I'm never doing that again, because I didn't like this sense of feeling trapped. But the problem was, from that point on, I was 16 and I didn't have any systems or processes around me to help me function in the world. And so that's why, for the next 5 or 6 years in college and work, I really struggled. I got fired a lot. I was a bad student. And it was because I just couldn't show up and be accountable and be present. I hadn't figured out how to unlock that for myself. And so I studied psychology. I studied a lot of the habits of people who had accomplished things that I wanted to accomplish. Like you mentioned Richard Branson, like what were the habits and the rituals that those guys and gals deployed so that they could achieve these things. So I started learning those bits and pieces, taking them, and most of what I learned, like 99% of it didn't work for me, but every now and then I'd get a little success, and I would take that and I'd put it into like my reservoir of like tips and tricks. And after a certain point, I had so many that suddenly I had this control over my life, and I had figured out how to harness this hyper focus and use it as a strength rather than letting it use me as a weakness. And so all those things that I learned that helped me get control of my life, they were actually the same things that help you build a business, surprisingly. And so that's why I found like this interesting niche in that way. But to your point, like real estate and syndication, it's such an engaging thing once you understand how it works. And there's so many different places that you can play. And so I'm not a spreadsheet guy. My partner, Dan, he loves spreadsheets. If I had to do spreadsheets all day long, I'd probably not be a very happy camper. but I don't have to focus on that, right? I can have my partner do that, and I can focus on the aspects that I do like, which is talking to people or working on, operations on the actual
Being
property
creative.
level, like,
Being
yeah, more
creative.
creative things.
Yep.
Exactly. So it's all about taking those things that we perceive as weaknesses in ourselves and figuring out how can we leverage them and turn them into strengths, I think.
Beautifully said.
That's
Well
really
said.
special. I really enjoyed you sharing that with us. Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll touch on this again in a few moments, but we had a few questions here for you.
Yeah, I was
So
actually curious, Anthony. Did you start out in single family before you jumped into multifamily, or did you go right into multifamily?
Good question. So I actually started with fix and flips in college, and it was completely by happenstance. I had a roommate and his dad were doing this. And so I got kind of pulled into it along the way. And we did about 3 of those. And all I learned coming out of that was that I can swing a hammer, but I can't hit a nail. And that I absolutely hate construction. Like, no, like fix and flips were not the way for me. And so 10 years later, I had just kind of written off real estate because that's what I thought it was fix and flips, HGTV. Like, I didn't want any part of that. And then about 10 years later, a buddy comes to me and he says, "Hey, I'm going to go buy this quad. Do you want to do that with me?" And I was like, "No, that doesn't sound super interesting, but I'll give you some money so you can go do that." And so I passively invested before I even understood what that meant. And we did that project together, and we did another one. And it wasn't until about 2016 that I decided, oh, real estate's really interesting to me. This, going bigger, there's some really interesting aspects of scale. And that light bulb really went off in a very strange way. But from that, I said, okay, before I go big, I need to understand how these systems work on a small level. And so I went and I bought a triplex initially because I wanted to work with the tenants, the city. I wanted to understand how this little business works before I started scaling up. And within 6 months of that first triplex, I was like, okay, I think I understand enough. I'm ready to go into the next property. And from there, we just started scaling larger and larger.
amazing.
Nice.
And what seems to be the kind of consensus and common story we hear from many people involved in multifamily, where they start in single family, in fix and flips. But what kind of hurts my heart is for Canadians, especially for people in Vancouver and Toronto, our main metropolitan cities, where they hear these stories from people in the US, and when they try to implement those kind of business model in Vancouver or Toronto, is near impossible because the starting point, mortgage laws are very difficult. Starting point is very difficult. When you include the taxes and the fees paid to real estate agents for the purchase and the sale, you're most probably in negatives, let alone needing a huge down payment to be able to purchase a $1 million property.
Yeah,
An average home price here in Vancouver is well over $1 million. Where in the US it is possible, especially like in certain states, you can buy a house for $150,000. Unheard of, unseen here in Vancouver. So kind of difficult for that kind of idea of house flipping. Obviously, you could do it, but it's much more difficult. So that's great. Yeah. So let's talk about. Is this a question? My question here?
Yes, you wanted to.
Okay. Yeah, so great. So I think we touched on this kind of question. It was a question about your background. How did it bring in some experience and did it bring some value to your current position? But of course, we went into that in depth, and not only your background, but also your struggles with ADHD allowed you to bring on systems where you notice that those systems are already what's being used for people in business, checklists, task management software, I'm guessing. But maybe you can touch on that a bit more. Is there a task management software that you use? Again, this idea of multifamily syndication has many moving parts because you talk about the deal, where you got to find the deal, you got to underwrite that deal, you got to manage the deal, you got to add value to it. And on this side, you got the investors, where you got to cultivate a relationship with investors, you got to nurture that relationship and eventually present them with a deal. So all these moving parts, of course, there needs to be checklists. Of course, there needs to be software. So tell us about what type of checklists, if you use, or task management softwares that you use, and also if there's any books you can recommend to us.
Yeah, definitely. These are great questions, and you're speaking to my soul right now, because I'm all about the systems. And if something fails, it's not usually due to a person failing, it's due to the system failing. And so one of the things that we focus a lot on is really identifying step by step how to do the different. I was going to recommend that one by Atul Gawande. Exactly. Yeah. You know, and you can learn a lot from that in the fact that the aviation industry has managed to, you know, reduce the number of accidents so that you're more likely to get hit by lightning than you are to get, you know, in a plane accident.
29 million to one is there. 29. You have to be on 29 million point four flights. That was one of
It's crazy.
pages. Yeah.
Wow.
And so if they can do it, then you have to look at that and say, okay, something as simple as real estate or manufacturing, like surely we can implement the same thing. And it doesn't have to be big over the top checklists. And it really is about identifying the really important, most like 80-20 rule of like, what are the things that are going to move the lever the most? Let's dial in on those. And so from like a technology standpoint, I would say, don't get too hung up on any one technology. Find one that works for you and then run with it. So my manufacturing business, we almost exclusively run that on Google Drive and all the different resources that you can use there. This is like a $6 million company with 30 employees, like all through Google Drive. And so it's there. It's not super fancy or anything like that, but it's about how you actually show up every day and use those tools. Some other ones that I really like are Notion and Asana. I think those are really great in terms of like the Kanban systems. I think Airtable is pretty good too. I've used that a few times. But at the end of the day, it's about finding whatever's going to work for you and understanding like how you communicate with the rest of your team and then getting everybody accountable and using it. Because one of the biggest struggles is user buy-in. If only half the team is using the resource and using that singular repository and aren't updating the investor notes as they have conversations, well, it's, you know, it might as well just not even be used at that point. So you got to really be diligent. And that's the hard part with systems, is building the habit of using it until it becomes second nature.
Great. Yeah, and I have a quick story about systems and software. My background is in single family home construction. I had a company that specialized in building custom single family homes, and as my company was growing, I had to bring on a site superintendent. That's kind of the process that we went through. And my site super left, and I had to bring on someone else. And I brought a kid just out of school, out of BCIT, British Columbia Institute of Technology.
Yes,
and he came to my home office, and we were kind of discussing his tasks for the day. And I said, "Hey, here's the email list, and this is a list of your tasks for the day within an email." And he looked at me and with this kind of gesture, he's like, you guys don't use the software?
Yeah.
Like, I felt so embarrassed in that moment. So embarrassed. I felt like this young kid who's coming out, like telling me, and I thought I was, and it was that day that I didn't leave my office until I found a task management software that I could use. And I ended up finding Asana, and Asana has been a big part of our business, for us, for even our virtual assistants that help assist us. We use Asana to give them tasks, communicate, and it's been great. No, that's wonderful. So maybe we can move on.
Yeah, Asana is one of my favorite in that way. And honestly, like, people, if you're just starting out with a business or you're starting out in real estate, like, don't overthink it. You don't need to spend $10,000 on a software. You can go use the free version of Asana right now and go pretty far with it. So don't let that be the barrier that holds you back from actually implementing systems.
Yep. Which I used for many years until I upgraded, because the upgraded version has the linear view where you can the time lapse, where you can actually see
make a timeline and whatnot.
Timeline, exactly. So
stay really organized.
Trying
so back to multifamily.
Yes.
Anthony, what markets are you guys in right now?
So we focus exclusively in Minneapolis and St. Paul here in Minnesota. Okay. And that's because we're vertically integrated. We have built a property management team in-house. And so for us, we realize our local advantage by playing in our backyard and just grouping properties close together so that it's efficient from a scale perspective for our team. And it just happens to be that, when we started our investing journey, it could have gone either way from me. I could have invested out of state. I could have looked somewhere else, but Minneapolis is such a strong market for so many reasons that it just wasn't necessary for us to look externally. If you're living in Vancouver or you're in New York or San Francisco, like I lived in the Bay Area for a while, it's very, very hard to invest in those markets. So if you're listening to this and you're like, well, that's great, it's easy for you to say, you just go invest in your backyard. Like, and for a lot of Canadians listening to this, it's probably pretty difficult to invest into these types of deals in Canada and make the numbers work. And so by extension, you have to be looking somewhere remotely.
Yeah, and touch on that. Maybe you can, before I get into my question, tell us about Minneapolis and the area you invest in. What are those points that you feel like that makes the area strong? Talk to us about fundamentals of job growth and population growth if they exist. Talk to us about the industry. Sell us on Minneapolis.
Oh boy. Yeah. Buckle up, guys. Because most people, when they think of really cool, hot markets, they don't think of Minnesota. And that's maybe rightfully so. But when you look at all the top 10 lists from like CBRE, Marcus and 𝗖𝗽, IRR, Minneapolis is almost always in the top 10. It's sitting around 6th, 7th, 8th place on these lists, almost exclusively. And what happens is people, they look at the top 5 and then they don't look any further. And so they don't realize it. And that's great for us because it reduces a little bit of the competition. But the reason it's so strong is for a couple different factors. One is our economic diversity and strength. So we have over 15 Fortune 500 companies, which means we have more Fortune 500 companies headquartered here in Twin Cities than any other city per capita in the US.
And why is that? Is it where it's located kind of geographically or?
Geographically, and then in terms of like operations, it's one of those places that's very operator friendly to operate a business, or has been in the past. And so we have like these, it's incredible how diverse these industries are as well. It's not like Detroit where it's all automotive. It's not like Silicon Valley where it's all tech. You know, we have General Mills, Best Buy, Target. We have, what else do we have? Why am I blanking right now? Best Buy. I think I already said that one. Cargill, which is the largest privately owned company in the US, right? So all these really diverse industries. And then you couple that with a couple other things that are interesting, which is we have the 3rd largest university in the country, which is the University of Minnesota. We have the #1 healthcare system, which is the Mayo Rochester Clinic. And then if you look over, the historic data, let's say from 2008 onward, and we see how the financial crisis really affected the Twin Cities, what we see is that this area was almost entirely unaffected. We had a slight little dip, but by 2010, we were right back to where we were before. And year over year, we've been seeing steady growth since 2000. And there hasn't been a year that we haven't seen positive 1% growth. And so it's one of those markets that you're not ever going to see like setting the sky on fire in terms of like, this is the hot new market, but it's one of those sleeper markets that people don't realize is out there just consistently performing year over year. And then there's a bunch of other reasons from like a cultural perspective why we really like it. We have the #1 bike trail system where what are we considered the LGBTQ friendliest state in the country, or the city in the country. We took that from San Francisco, so take that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. I'm like, next to San Francisco. Wow.
Yeah. We have the highest quality of life in one of the I believe we're the fittest city in terms of heart health, which is one of the #1 killers of people in the US. So like all these things come together at the end of the day to like make a really strong economic argument for why we like to invest here. And like at the end of the day, if you have good job stability, if you have good job growth and population growth, those are the things that you're really wanting to see inside of a market. So we don't like seeing hockey stick growth like these Southeast markets. Sure, like Austin, Texas, it is a booming market. It's going to do very, very well. We don't want to compete in that market because that's where everybody else is competing. So we really like where we're at in the stack.
You feel like you have a niche and kind of, the market, the area, and it's shown consistent growth, just like you mentioned. So, that's great. I mean, that's key, right?
Mm-hmm. And one of the craziest things is what happens in the Midwest quite often is when kids, they come to college age, millennials historically, they would leave the Midwest. They would go somewhere that was more interesting. And we would have a net migration of millennial age people leaving. And in the last 4 or 5 years, there's been so much tech and so much industry moving into the Twin Cities that we're now one of the most like remote worker friendly cities in the country. And we're seeing a net inflow of those millennial age jobs and people that usually would leave to go to New York or the Bay Area, down to Austin, like these other places. And so for whatever reason, people are starting to get like tuned in that the Twin Cities is kind of a cool place to live.
Awesome.
Oh, that's
Awesome.
really cool.
Probably medium home price is probably way
Yeah.
less than anywhere in New York or California as well. So that's probably
Yeah, and that was something else that we didn't touch on, is that our median income is very high. It's about 70,000, which is pretty high in terms of like a national average. I think it's like 15,000 over the national average. But then you combine that with a median home price that's very affordable. You get this affordability index, which means people's money goes further here. You put maybe 30% of your paycheck towards housing, and our food, our gas, like all these other resources are relatively inexpensive. People are left with a lot of disposable income. And when you have a lot of disposable income, suddenly you can buy back your time. You don't have to work 5 days. I was going to say 8 days a week, but you don't have to do that either. You don't have to work 5 days a week. Maybe you take an extra day off, you take more vacations. And that's why we have such a high quality of life.
Beautiful.
Great.
And that's great. So since you guys syndicate deals with investors, and that's great to hear they have some extra money on their hands, maybe you can talk to us about the process on how you guys cultivate relationships with investors and how do you nurture those relationships. And eventually when you guys do have a deal to show to them, what's the process for offering that deal to your investors?
Yeah, that's a great question. So initially, when we first started, it was just first ring, connections, our family, our friends, people saying, hey, mostly people coming to us and saying, hey, what are you guys doing over here? This is pretty cool. Can we do this with you? And we started letting those people in on little joint ventures here and there. And then as we started syndicating, that was really due to, we hit this scale where there was referrals coming in. People had been in deals like, hey, they talked to a friend, like you should go and invest with these guys. And so it just kind of started expanding pretty organically that way. Word of mouth referral is the best way to expand any business. And that's what really got us started. Now we focus a lot as well on just building out a digital presence, because everybody is somewhere on the digital landscape. I can't necessarily drive down to Nashville tomorrow and meet with an investor, but I can hop on a call with them. They can have access to me by seeing my content out in the world and then say, oh, this sounds like somebody that maybe I want to work with. And so that's been a really integral part of growing our investor base, is putting out educational content to help people understand how they could get involved in this vehicle. And we don't like being salesy. We're not trying to pitch our deals to anybody or why they should work with us in particular. What we pitch is educate and learn how multifamily works, because once you learn how it works, it naturally sells yourself. The light bulb goes off and you go, this makes a lot of sense. And so we don't want people to think, hey, you need to work with us, because that's not the case. There's a lot of really good operators out there, and we might not be the right ones for you depending on your risk profile, the return metrics, the demographic that you're looking to invest in. And so we want to be able to connect people, whether that's connecting them to the education or connecting them with the other operators that would best serve them. And so that's been our approach from day one, and served us really well. In terms of, once we have a deal under contract and we start going through the motions of raising capital and putting it, getting it to the closing table, it's probably no different than any other operator out there. We get the deal under contract and we start by first talking one-on-one as much as possible with the investors that we know have a high interest and we understand what they're looking for. And so when an investor comes into our funnel, we sit down and have a conversation with them so we can understand what their needs are, what their desired outcome is. And then we make notes about that so that as an opportunity comes up, we can say, oh, so-and-so, this would be a perfect fit for them. Let's call them and have that one-on-one conversation and say, hey, this thing just came across our table. Per the last time we talked, you mentioned that you were looking for this and this and this. This is going to be a really good fit for that. So we kind of do it the old school way of like phone calls and one-on-one conversations. But then we also do the email blast and we do the webinar that, the investor webinar, where we get the group together so that you can benefit from hearing other investors' questions. And we go through the model of like, what do we see in this deal that's interesting? What's unique about it? Let's look at the underwriting assumptions together. And from there, then it's just kind of a mad dash to the finish line. These deals fill up really quickly. And so we always try to have our investors as well prepared before a deal goes under contract so that they're not left, out in the cold once it fills up. So if somebody is investing with like self-directed IRA funds, that usually takes a little bit more time to get the ball rolling. And so we like to put that on their radar because we usually know a couple days or a week in advance if a deal is going to go under contract. So we try and give as much lead time as possible.
Great,
Nice.
great. Lots of great information there. But I think this is a great time to kind of discuss CPI Capital and the process that we have with partnering with active operators in the US, just like Anthony and Anthony's group is. I was listening to 𝗖𝗣𝗶𝘁 and he talks about his process of partnering with active operators, and he looks for operators who are in between that 3 and 10 deal track record. So for us, we feel the same way. We obviously we're located here in Canada. We have Canadian investors. We solve certain pain points for the Canadian investors, which is relief from double taxation. Also, this concept of pooled capital through a limited partnership, servicing non-accredited and accredited investors. But on the deal side, now rather than us just hiring some asset manager in the US, the way we've modeled our company is to partner with active operators who are themselves are not remote investors. For example, Anthony's group is boots on the ground. They're in their region. But what we do is we supplement in one of their deals. We come on as co-GP. And this is not a sales pitch to you. I'm not trying to sell you, Anthony, but we've discussed before. But I just want to kind of go over how these kind of partnerships begin, because our team and Anthony's team have spoken before about possible collaboration. And this is more on the CPI Academy, kind of the educational side of it. But this is how it begins. We see an active operator, we see their track record, we see their need to scale, and we allow for the Canadian investors to come on board as a single entity and invest as co-GP with one of the deals they got. Of course, the deal then gets to be seen at many sets of eyes. Their team looks at it since they're investors and their name is on the deal. Our team and our underwriting looks at the deal and make sure it matches what our criteria is. And at that time, you have two strong teams which are working hard for the investors to make great returns and for capital preservation and capital growth. So just wanted to kind of say, I know that this wasn't scripted or planned, but just wanted to kind of say that out there for potentials, and for people also understand how we...
And the Canadian investors to understand how things work.
And I love your guys' model because you're solving really, I would say, poignant pain points for your Canadian investors, which is that double taxation and then like the single entity. Like those are legitimate issues that really bite into return projections, right? And so you guys are solving that in a really interesting way. And what I would say is that in the best world, you find this perfect synchronization between deal flow and capital flow. And when those two things are in perfect alignment, then you can hit that inflection growth point where it's just straight to the moon, right? But the problem is, if you're focusing on what you're best at, you're probably not best at both of those things. You're either really good at the deal finding, maybe you're good at the operations, maybe you're good at the capital raising. And so where a group like you guys are really interesting is that you focus on the niche of the capital and really servicing that well. Whereas groups like myself, we focus a lot on the operations and the deal finding. We also do capital raising, but it's just an arm of what we do. Whereas you guys, that's like the big muscle that you come to flex at the table, which is a very powerful muscle.
Yep. And that's the beauty. That's what I fell in love with the syndication process is the scalability. Right now, you guys are watching a potential collaboration live on YouTube for our two groups. And, in some months or years time, you might see a deal that's done by both of these groups. But that's how things come along, because the concept of real estate syndication allows for multiple groups to be involved, for it to be structured any way that kind of makes sense for both teams and both groups. And again, this concept is a teamwork. It's just like a sports team where you have certain players playing certain positions. Certain people might be better at certain positions. For us, it's not only the capital raised, but also we feel like we do have somewhat of a monopoly. We do have a niche market here. In the US, there are many teams just like you were saying, there's many groups in Texas offering this concept of apartment syndication, and in Arizona, in other states. But in your area, you guys are very focused and to seem to be a strong team that's coming on, a strong group that's being very active. So for us, we're bringing this concept, which is a concept that exists in the U.S. and the math works perfectly in the U.S. because of the rent to value ratio, because over 300 million people living in this country, because the rents are very decent, where real estate prices are still fairly low. So it allows Canadians to invest, and the system we've created now, as far as the limited partnerships and the flow through companies and the corporations,
very intricate.
And the compliance on both sides of our borders, it doesn't make sense for one person or one entity, but it does make sense when you talk about tens or hundreds of investors who come together into a single entity, which eventually becomes a single owner of or the single investor onto a entity that owns the asset in the U.S. So
definitely, or what
super
I like
exciting
to say,
stuff.
Bringing Canada as the 51st state to kind of.
Well, don't say that to patriotic Canadians.
Okay. That's true. Now,
Yeah, it reminds me of that quote: "Alone we are weak, together we are strong." And by combining and bringing our forces together, we can bake these really big pies where maybe you're not eating the whole pie yourself. Maybe you're only getting a slice of it, but the slice is so much bigger than if you had baked it all by yourself.
Exactly. And on the co-GP side, just I keep promoting this concept of syndication, but on the co-GP side, so if you're a co-general partner on a deal, it allows you, because you're operator, you're part owner of the asset, allows your assets under management you raise that amount. A lot of people in this space are judged by their assets under management.
That's true.
And if you can partner with another team and you guys buy a $20 million asset instead of a $10 million asset, now you got the $20 million asset under management. So it's a great way of also building that brand and building that impressions that's for others looking.
And on the investor side, you get to say that you're part owner of a $20 million asset as well.
Exactly.
Which always feels good, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Anthony, maybe you can kind of touch base on what your business model is like. Are you focused on value add, cash flow, or deep value add where the asset is unstable?
And
maybe you can say which one of what each one of those processes are.
Yeah.
So the value add process, the just cash flow, where is an A-class asset, for example, or the deep value add, where the asset might not be stable from day one, it might not be cash flowing. So there's significant work that needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's start then with the stable asset, because let's think of this like kind of like a hierarchy or a triangle, a pyramid of sorts. At the very top, we have our Class A assets. Those are going to be our brand new builds. When you drive around the downtown area and you see all the sky cranes going up, like they're typically building Class A buildings. And these are going to demand a high rent premium. They are at the top of the market. And so they resemble this very safe, secure asset. And it attracts a type of institutional or risk-averse investor who just wants to park their money in an inflationary hedge that's generating some kind of consistent cash flow. Now, it's not going to be crazy cash flow, but it's going to be maybe 5 or 6% cash on cash, which isn't terrible, all things considered. The problem with the Class A buildings is that they're brand new. They're not going to appreciate very much. So if you go and sell them in 5 years, they're not going to be worth terribly much more than what they were worth when you built them. So there's not going to be this big appreciation pop at the end for investors. So that's your Class A. That's more of a cash flow yield play where you just want to park your money. And this is great for risk-averse investors or people that are just looking for capital preservation. They already have a ton of money. They just want to park it somewhere nice and safe. A step down from that is what we do is the value add model. And we really like the value add model because it allows us to both benefit from the cash flow, but then also from the big appreciation pop. And the way this works is we go into Class C and Class B assets, and we find an asset where there's a delta between in-place rents and market rents. There's some kind of delta where we say, okay, we can go and increase the revenue that this asset's bringing in, or we think that there's some way that we can bring operational efficiencies to the table to decrease expenses, because those are the two big levers that dictate a building's value. It's all based off of NOI divided by cap rate. So the NOI, which is our net operating income, that's our revenue minus our expenses. So if we can boost our revenue and decrease our expenses, we've increased our NOI, we've increased the value of our building. And that's what we like to do because it puts a lot of control into our hands. So one step down from that then is more of a distressed deal. And this is a deal where there's a lot of value to be added, but it's not stable from day one. So the assets that we go and we purchase, they're cash flowing from day one, even as we go and do the value add, as we're doing improvements on units and on common areas, and we're improving the operations, they still are almost fully tenanted. So they're still generating cash flow while we're doing this transition. A distressed deal might not be cash flowing. It might be a number of years before it cash flows, in fact. And you got to go in there and you got to do a lot of heavy lifting, putting in, a new roof or boilers or plumbing, things that are pretty hard and pretty expensive to do. But the idea is that once you've done all that, there's theoretically a ton of value that's been added. And so at the end, you're going to see really big returns. So it's high risk, high reward. And so it just depends what's the right model for you. It's all based off of your individual investor profile, like how risk averse you are, how quickly you're looking to grow your capital. But for us, it is always coming back to that value add model, because that's where we find that Goldilocks zone of we get good cash flow between 8 to 10% year on year. And then our IRR is typically around 20%. And so really solid returns in an environment where there's pretty mitigated downside. And so that's what we look for personally. Now, before COVID, we were looking at deals that were, I would say, heavier value adds, where there was more work to be done. There was more work on meat on the bone. But COVID kind of scared us a little bit because we didn't know what was going to happen in terms of eviction moratoriums, in terms of construction costs, like labor and supplies. These things skyrocketed through the roof during COVID. So we made a conscious decision to back away from the heavier value adds and make a move towards more stabilized light value adds, where there was still meat on the bone and we could add value, but it wasn't predicated on us going in from day one and throwing tons of money at the property to fix it up and make it pretty. And so that's kind of the pyramid and how you can kind of think of like class A, class B, class C, and the different ways that you might fit in as an investor.
Very well said.
Yeah, thank you for explaining.
I must admit, sometimes you watch a YouTube video and then you rewind just to hear that perfect spot that the person was saying. I'm going to do that for this video. I couldn't wait to. I'm like, hold on a second. I want to rewind. I just want to pause them, but I'm like, it's live. I'm recording it right now, but I will definitely do that. I really love the way you described that. And I might just take a few of those excerpts and use it possibly on my LinkedIn or other places.
Thank you for that, Anthony.
But
absolutely.
It's been great, man. We really appreciate having you on. We would love to have you on again, and we would like to book a call.
We're gonna book a call with you. August, I can tell he's itching to book a call with you.
Yeah, I would love to, guys. This has been a pleasure. I love talking about this stuff because again, like going back to why we do what we do, and I'm sure you guys have like a very similar why, which is that you see the power of this vehicle and it feels almost greedy to keep it to yourself and not share it and not to spread the word, right? Like you have a duty to spread it. And so coming on these and having this conversation, it's a lot of fun. And hopefully somebody out there, maybe it turns a light bulb for them and they see like, oh, I could actually do this. And they take that next step to jump in. Absolutely. I call it win-win-win because the people in the community are winning because we go in there and improve units.
Yes.
Our employees and all the jobs we create are winning, and also our investors are winning, and we're part of the investors as well. So it's like a win-win-win. Everybody wins in this situation, where usually in business somebody's losing for somebody to win, but in this case it's winners all the way
winners
around.
all around.
If you'd like to conclude with
we're going to conclude with our favorite question we like to ask our guests, and that would be, what is your best number one advice that you would give to a passive investor
looking to invest in this type of vehicle, if you may?
Yes.
Yeah. So number one piece of advice, and you're going to hear this from pretty much everybody, is that you're betting on the jockey, not the horse. And so in this analogy, the jockey is the operator. The horse is the deal. The deal does not matter as much as the jockey. And the reason is this: a winning jockey, like a championship level jockey, isn't going to go and ride a lame horse that he doesn't think can win the championship, right? Like Tom Brady didn't go to a football team that he thought had no chance of ever performing, right? So when the jockey comes to you with a horse and you know that jockey is a championship level jockey, you can trust that that deal is probably pretty good. Okay. But if you focus just on the deal, then you overlook the jockey, and all you're caring about is the returns and like, oh, that one has a 22% IRR and this one was only 20%. I'm going with that one, without thinking about who's operating the deal. That's wrong, because we can make a deal pro forma show whatever numbers we want. We can make the spreadsheet lie. Numbers can be made to lie very easily. And so if you don't have an operator that you know, like, and trust, and that you have this confidence that they have the ability to execute the business plan, then the deal doesn't matter. Because a great operator, they're going to take lemons and they're going to make lemonade. A bad operator is going to take lemonade and just spill it on the ground. So make sure that you spend the time finding those operators that are going to win the championship, and then work with them.
That is the best advice
Best
ever. Thank you for that.
Now on the reverse side, talking about the operator,
Yeah.
what would be your number one advice to someone looking to get into the real estate syndication, or they're in their starting kind of phase of their business? What would be your advice to the operator?
So if you're looking to get into syndication because it's the sexy thing, everybody talks about it, like it's the greatest thing, and it is. It's really great. If you're looking to jump into a syndication and take money from passive investors, and you've never done a real estate deal before, if you don't have any other prior related business experience, you need to pump the brakes and think hard and long about what you're about to do, because taking other people's money is a sacred trust. That money, if you just think about it a little bit differently, and you don't see the greenback, and you just think about it as somebody spent their life in exchange for that, and they're giving you a piece of their life to go and do right by. If you don't have that experience or that confidence to do right by that, and you can't look them in the eye and say, I'm going to perform, and say that with a straight face and mean it, then you're not ready yet. And just because you can get into this industry with little or no money down, or you can do it all with other people's money, doesn't mean you should. You need to take your lumps first and do it with your own money, do it with, friends and close loved ones, if anything, but make sure that by the time you get to that point where you're taking other people's money, you're not learning at their expense.
Well said. Well said. Especially if you want to be in it long term and not be a one-hit wonder. So that is about
exactly
scalability and continuous.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned this before, with 𝗖𝗣𝗜, not doing deals with an operator that hasn't done, 3 to 10 deals already. It's like that time in the game matters, and showing that they didn't just burn out after 1 or 2 deals. That really matters a lot.
For sure. And he was talking about this sweet spot where it's more than 3 deals, but not more than 10, where the person is hungry enough to, bring on partners and what have you, but they haven't done enough deals that they're like, hey, I'm set, so I'm good. I don't need to bring anyone on. And then they're more, they're more restrictive on their fees and what have you. So that's, he was talking about the sweet spot. But yeah, that's great. Hey man,
Thank you,
we really
Anthony.
appreciate to have you on. We can't wait to have you on again. Have you also your partner at some point. It would be great.
Definitely.
Awesome.
We'll be sending you an email shortly.
Look forward to it, guys.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you
Take
so
care.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Talk to
Bye-bye.
you soon. Bye.